I never thought a simple family visit could change my life so radically. I'm Elena, 42 years old, and for 2 decades, I've been the epitome of dedication as a wife and mother. My husband, Antonio, and I have raised 2 outstanding children, Laura, who is 18, and Sophia, who is 16. Our home has always been a picture of the perfect family. But everything changed with the unexpected arrival of my nephew, Marco, who is 23. Marco embodied youth and vitality. Tall, muscular, with a smile that could light up any room, he was the son of my older brother, Marco, who lived in a distant city. It had been years since we last saw him, and I was taken aback by the transformation of the boy I remembered into the man standing before me. As he hugged me tightly, calling me Aunt Elena, I felt an unexpected sensation run down my spine. His firm body pressed against mine, leaving me momentarily breathless. I tried to brush off the strange feeling, focusing on how much Marco had changed. Over the next few days, everything seemed normal. Marco spent most of his time with his cousins, and we talked about university and his future plans. Antonio was away on a business trip, leaving the house to just us girls and Marco. One summer night, everything changed. Before going to bed, I usually walked around the house in my robe, making sure everything was in order. The girls were used to it, and Antonio was rarely home at that hour. As I stood in the kitchen, sipping water, I heard a noise behind me. Turning around, I found Marco standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on me. "I'm sorry, Aunt Elena," he murmured, his voice deeper than usual. "I just came to get some water." I suddenly realized how revealing my nightgown was under the kitchen light. Instinctively, I crossed my arms to cover my chest. "It's okay, Marco," I said, trying to stay calm. "Make yourself at home." He stepped closer, and the small kitchen seemed to shrink even more. I could feel the heat radiating from his body and hear his slightly accelerated breathing. "Aunt Elena," he said, his voice soft yet strong, "you are truly beautiful." Before I could respond, his lips were on mine. The kiss was intense, filled with a passion I had never experienced before. For a brief moment, I let myself feel it, my body responding in ways that surprised and overwhelmed me. But then, the reality of the situation hit me like a thunderbolt. I pushed Marco away, breathing heavily, completely shocked. "This is wrong, Marco," I whispered, my voice filled with anxiety. He stepped closer, his eyes a mix of complicated emotions. "Aunt Elena, I know you felt it too. We can't pretend this didn't happen." I quickly left the room, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I couldn't get the memory of his lips on mine out of my head. I knew it was wrong, but there was a part of me that couldn't deny the strong connection we had. The following days were a true challenge. Every time I saw Marco, the tension in the air was palpable. I tried to keep myself busy with friends and household chores, avoiding being alone with him. But one afternoon, while the girls were at school, I found myself alone with Marco again. I was in the laundry room, sorting clothes, when he entered and closed the door behind him. "Aunt Elena," he said, his voice deep and intense, "we need to talk." "There's nothing to discuss, Marco," I replied, backing away until I was stopped by the washing machine behind me. "It was a mistake." He moved closer, his eyes filled with a vulnerability that disarmed me. "It wasn't a mistake," he insisted. "I know you felt the same way." Before I could say anything, he leaned in and kissed me again. This time, my emotions were so tangled that I couldn't resist. The kiss was passionate, filled with pent-up emotions that burst forth. Between what my conscience dictated and my true feelings, I whispered that this was wrong. "I know," Marco replied, his honesty taking me by surprise. "But I can't control it." In that moment, the defenses I had built began to crumble. The tension between us was undeniable, as were the potential consequences. Leaving the laundry room, I knew this couldn't happen again. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. I thought about how we had reached this point and how to find a solution. The guilt I felt intensified, mixed with an overwhelming fear of being found out. The night before Antonio's return, Marco and I ended up in the backyard after everyone had gone to bed. "What are we going to do?" I asked, feeling tears well up in my eyes. Marco wrapped his arms around me, trying to comfort me. "I don't know," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "But we can't keep doing this. We have to stop." Under the starlit sky, That night was the last moment we shared together. Every word, every gesture was filled with a sense of farewell. We tried to capture each moment, knowing we wouldn't have another chance. The next day, the atmosphere was charged. Marco announced he was returning to his city earlier than planned, citing a university emergency. The girls were disappointed, while I felt a bittersweet mix of relief and sadness. When Marco left, we shared a brief hug in front of the girls. "Thank you for everything," he murmured, his voice filled with hidden meanings. "Take care, Marco," I replied, feeling a part of me break inside. As I watched his car drive away, I knew nothing would ever be the same. My marriage, my family, even my self-perception had been profoundly altered by this experience. Antonio returned that night, exhausted but happy to be home. As he hugged me, a wave of guilt washed over me, so intense that I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Are you okay, dear?" he asked, noticing something in my expression. I forced a smile. "Just a little tired." "How was your trip?" In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to return to my usual routine, being the wife, mother, and homemaker I had always been. But a persistent memory lingered in my mind. What I had experienced with Marco was etched into my being, refusing to fade away. Family gatherings became a true challenge. Every time I looked at Marco, my heart raced uncontrollably. Our brief, meaningful glances said more than words ever could. Those fleeting moments felt like a sweet torture, constantly reminding me of what we had shared and could never have again. Over the months, I tried to convince myself that what happened with Marco was just a mistake, a moment of vulnerability. I focused on my marriage, striving to be the ideal wife I had always tried to be. But in the quiet moments, when everyone was asleep and silence reigned, my mind wandered back to those moments. I relived the intensity, the emotion, and that feeling of being alive and desired, something I hadn't felt in a long time. A year after the incident, I received an invitation to Marco's wedding. Reading the sophisticated card, my heart ached. He was moving on, building a new chapter in his life, while I remained trapped in a whirlwind of emotions, torn between desire and regret. On the day of the ceremony, I sat in the church with Antonio, watching Marco exchange vows with his young bride. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I felt the weight of everything we had shared. It was a memory that still lingered deep within me. During the reception, we found a moment to talk alone. "How are you, Aunt Elena?" Marco asked softly. "I'm fine," I lied. "And you? Are you happy?" He smiled, but his eyes held an underlying sadness. "I'm trying to be. But I can't forget what we shared." A heavy silence fell between us, filled with unspoken emotions. Finally, I gathered the courage to ask, "Do you think this will ever go away?" My voice was barely a whisper. Marco exhaled deeply. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe we just have to learn to live with it." I nodded, understanding the depth of his words. What we had experienced left an indelible mark on both of us. We returned to the celebration, each resuming our roles, but carrying a secret that weighed heavily on us. Life continued around us, filled with laughter and festivities, while we grappled with a storm of hidden emotions. Years later, looking back on that summer, I realize how those moments irrevocably changed my life. The guilt remains, as does the regret for the lies and risks we took. But there is a part of me that can't fully regret what I shared with Marco. It taught me about the power of desire, the complexity of love, and the boundaries that society and morality impose on our emotions. It was a mistake, it was risky, but it was also an experience that changed my life. Marco and I never spoke directly about what happened again. It's a closed chapter, a silent bond that both unites and separates us. But in some family gatherings, our eyes meet, and in his gaze, I see an echo of that connection that once consumed us. I know what we did was wrong by society's standards and moral norms. I know we risked more than we should have. But I also know that for a fleeting moment, I experienced a connection and passion that many never get to feel. Maybe that's the most important lesson it left me, that love, in all its forms, is a powerful and unpredictable force, capable of taking us to places we never imagined exploring. As the years passed, the memory of that summer remained vivid in my mind. Every family gathering, every holiday, every birthday, they all became bittersweet reminders of what had transpired. Marco and I exchanged glances that spoke volumes, even though we never uttered a word about it. The guilt and regret lingered, but so did the memory of the passion and intensity we shared. It was a secret that bound us together, a silent understanding that we both carried. One day, during a family reunion, I found myself alone with Marco in the garden. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over everything. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared past hanging heavily in the air. "Do you ever think about it?" Marco finally asked, his voice soft and tentative. I nodded, unable to find the words. "Every day," I whispered. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and longing. "Me too," he admitted. We stood there, lost in our thoughts, the world around us fading away. It was as if time had stood still, and we were back in that moment, feeling the intensity and passion that had consumed us. "I never meant for any of this to happen," Marco said, his voice filled with regret. "I know," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "Neither did I." As we stood there, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the garden was bathed in the soft light of dusk. The moment was both beautiful and heart-wrenching, a reminder of the love and passion that had once existed between us. "We can't change the past," Marco said, his voice filled with resignation. "But we can learn from it." I nodded, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. "You were right," I said. "We can't change the past, but we can move forward." In that moment, I realized that the guilt and regret I had been carrying for so long were not serving me. They were holding me back, preventing me from moving forward and finding happiness. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. "I forgive you," I said, my voice filled with sincerity. Marco looked at me, his eyes filled with gratitude. "And I forgive you," he replied. As we stood there, the weight of the past lifted from our shoulders, and we were able to move forward, carrying the lessons we had learned and the love we had shared. The memory of that summer would always be a part of us, a reminder of the passion and intensity we had experienced. But it no longer held us back, no longer consumed us with guilt and regret. Instead, it was a beautiful memory, a testament to the power of love and the complexity of human emotions. And that was my story. I want to know your thoughts in the comments, and if you liked it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next stories. Goodbye for now.